Tasha Brooks walked into the courtroom with her head held high, her steps confident as they echoed across the marble floors. She was no stranger to the legal world, but today felt different. She could feel the tension in the air, as if the entire room was waiting for something to happen. She had always been able to read a room, and today the energy was thick like a storm was about to break. She was there for a reason, to observe a hearing that could bring down a major player in the real estate world. A man named Mark Bradford, whose business dealings had made him one of the most influential developers in Chicago, the kind of influence that had people in his pocket. But Tasha wasn't here to play games. She had worked for months gathering evidence, exposing Bradford's illegal activities, his fraudulent practices that pushed families out of their homes and into poverty. She had seen the pain of displaced tenants firsthand, and she had made it her mission to hold people like Bradford accountable. The courtroom was buzzing with anticipation as the trial began. Judge Robert Hayes, a man with a reputation for being tough but fair, took his seat at the bench, his gavel striking once to silence the room. Tasha sat quietly in the back of the room, her notebook open, ready to take notes on any development that could help her case. She had done her homework and had been following the case closely, knowing that this hearing was crucial for the next phase of her investigation. But what she didn't expect was what happened next. As the hearing progressed, Tasha's frustration began to build. She had gathered all the evidence that was needed to expose Bradford's corruption. She had submitted the files with every detail meticulously outlined, but as the judge reviewed the evidence, his dismissive tone made her blood boil. He casually dismissed her submission as if it were unimportant, as if the lives of those affected by Bradford's greed were just a footnote in his court. That's when Tasha's patience ran out. She couldn't stay quiet any longer. Judge Hayes looked up at her for a brief moment before continuing with the proceedings. Tasha stood up and called out loud enough for the whole room to hear, "This is ridiculous, Your Honor. This evidence is critical to the case. You can't just ignore it." The room went silent. Every eye was on her. Judge Hayes paused, clearly taken aback by her sudden outburst. His eyebrows furrowed as he looked down at her. Tasha could feel every pair of eyes in the room on her. She knew the risks, but she also knew that this moment could be the turning point in her fight for justice. She stood her ground, even as the judge's voice cut through the tension, calling her out of order. "Miss Brooks, you will be fined $500 for contempt of court," he declared, his voice stern and unwavering. The fine was meant to silence her, but it only fueled her determination. Tasha didn't back down. She stared at him without flinching. Even as the courtroom murmured behind her, she knew this wasn't the end of her fight. It was only the beginning. There was something more at play here, something bigger than she had realized, and the judge's reaction only confirmed it. In that moment, Tasha made a vow to herself. She wasn't going to let this man or anyone else in the system stand in the way of the truth. Tasha had always known that her path would be challenging, but nothing had prepared her for the kind of uphill battle she faced now. Ever since she had transitioned into the world of private investigations, her life had been a constant grind. She had come from humble beginnings, growing up in a small neighborhood on the outskirts of Detroit, where she learned early on how to fight for what was hers. Her mother had always emphasized the importance of education and hard work, even when the odds were stacked against them. Tasha had taken those lessons to heart and used them to propel herself forward despite the odds stacked against her. After high school, she worked long hours at a local diner to put herself through college, studying criminal justice, while also picking up odd jobs to make ends meet. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave her the skills and the mindset needed to eventually land a job at a small detective agency in Chicago. Once there, she quickly realized how much the world needed people who weren't afraid to question the system, people who weren't intimidated by power or wealth, and that's when Tasha decided to become a private investigator. Over the years, she built her reputation slowly but surely, earning the respect of her peers and becoming known for her meticulous attention to detail, her ability to dig through mountains of paperwork and find the truth buried deep within the most complex cases. But it wasn't just about solving cases. It was about seeking justice for those who had no voice, the victims who were overlooked by the system, the people who needed someone to stand up for them. It was this sense of justice that drove her to take on her current case, the real estate scandal involving Mark Bradford, and the corrupt network that protected him for months. Tasha had worked tirelessly gathering evidence, piecing together testimonies from tenants who had been evicted under false pretenses, and uncovering shady deals between developers and politicians. The more she uncovered, the more she realized how far-reaching the corruption went and just how powerful the people involved were. But Tasha wasn't afraid of them, not even when she found out that one of the most influential men in the system, Judge Robert Hayes, had been involved. The fine handed down by Judge Hayes during the hearing earlier that day stung, but it wasn't the first time Tasha had been faced with resistance from the very institutions she sought to expose. She'd been followed, had her car broken into, and had been threatened more than once since starting her investigation, but it only fueled her determination. She had dealt with far worse in her life than a courtroom setback, and she wasn't about to let a corrupt judge intimidate her into backing down. That night, Tasha sat at her kitchen table staring at the mountain of files spread out before her, each piece of evidence meticulously organized. She couldn't let go of the feeling that she was onto something bigger than just a case of corporate greed. She felt it in her gut. Something about Judge Hayes' reaction earlier didn't sit right with her. She had seen that look in his eyes, the arrogance, the disbelief, as if he had assumed she was just another person to be dismissed and shut down. But he was wrong. She knew this wasn't just about one man. It was about a system that had allowed corruption to thrive for far too long. Tasha wasn't just going to take down Mark Bradford. She was going to expose every person involved, no matter how high up they were. And with each passing day, her resolve grew stronger. She couldn't afford to lose now. Not when she was so close to uncovering the truth. It was no longer just about her career or her reputation. It was about justice, and she would stop at nothing to see it through to the end. Tasha had always been a meticulous investigator, and her ability to connect the dots was one of the reasons her clients trusted her. But as she dove deeper into the case, the connection she was uncovering made her stomach churn. What had started as an investigation into one real estate mogul's illegal activities was quickly becoming something much larger, much more dangerous. The corruption wasn't confined to a single individual or company. It stretched all the way to the very heart of the city's political and legal systems. It was early morning when Tasha sat in her small apartment, staring at her laptop screen, cross-referencing names, addresses, and transaction histories. Mark Bradford, the real estate mogul who was supposed to be the target of her investigation, was merely the tip of the iceberg. The more Tasha uncovered, the more it became apparent that Bradford had been a puppet in a much larger game, controlled by an elite network of politicians, developers, and even law enforcement officers. What was truly disturbing, though, was the involvement of Judge Robert Hayes. Tasha had already known about Hayes' ties to Bradford. What she hadn't known until now was just how deep the connection went. There were records of large sums of money funneled from Bradford's company into Judge Hayes' personal account, payments disguised as consulting fees and legal services. But it wasn't just money. Tasha had found evidence suggesting that Hayes had been using his position to dismiss cases that would have otherwise exposed Bradford's illegal dealings. Even more chilling was the discovery that Hayes had played a part in falsifying land deals, helping Bradford acquire properties through means that were, at best, morally questionable, and, at worst, outright illegal. The realization hit her hard. This wasn't just about exposing corporate greed or taking down a crook judge. The corruption ran so deep that it threatened the very integrity of the legal system. Tasha knew that going public with her findings would be dangerous, but she also knew there was no turning back. She had come too far, and too many people had already suffered for too long. To make things even more complicated, Tasha learned that Hayes wasn't just involved in real estate. His name kept appearing in other sectors, particularly in law enforcement circles. He had connections with several high-ranking police officers who had been covering up crimes, silencing whistleblowers, and manipulating investigations to protect the interests of wealthy developers and politicians. The corruption had infected nearly every level of the city's power structure. As she sat there, contemplating her next steps, Tasha's phone buzzed. It was a text from an anonymous number with a single sentence. Asterisk, you're getting too close. Back off. Asterisk, her heart raced. The text was a warning, and she knew it wasn't empty. She'd received similar threats before, but this one felt different. It felt personal. Someone knew exactly what she was investigating, and they weren't happy about it. Tasha took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Fear was a tool, and she wasn't about to let it control her. She had faced adversity her entire life, and she wasn't about to let a group of corrupt people scare her into silence. This was bigger than her, bigger than anyone she knew. She thought about the tenants who had lost their homes, the families who had been forced out of their neighborhoods so that wealthy developers could make a profit. They didn't have the power to fight back, but she did. The next day, she took a risk and reached out to an old colleague from the police force, Detective Danny Alvarez. Danny had always been a bit of a maverick, someone who didn't play by the rules but got the job done. He was one of the few people she trusted with the full scope of her investigation. He agreed to meet her in a coffee shop on the outskirts of town, away from prying eyes. As she sat down across from him, she felt a sense of urgency. She needed someone who could help her navigate the legal and criminal hurdles that lay ahead. She wasn't just going after a corrupt judge anymore. She was going after an entire network of powerful people who would stop at nothing to protect their interests. As Danny listened to her story, he leaned forward, his expression hardening. "Tasha," he said slowly, "this isn't just a case anymore. You've uncovered a war." The coffee shop was quiet, the clink of mugs and soft hum of the espresso machine providing the only sound as Tasha and Detective Danny Alvarez sat across from each other. She could see the wheels turning in Danny's mind as he processed the magnitude of what she had just shared. He had always been a no-nonsense kind of guy, but the gravity of the situation seemed to shake even him. He knew that what Tasha had uncovered wasn't just another crook developer or shady politician. It was something much darker and far-reaching. "Tasha, you've dug up more than you realize," Danny said, his voice low. "This is bigger than we thought. You're talking about a network of corruption that goes all the way to the top. This could be the kind of thing that brings the whole city down." Tasha took a deep breath, feeling a knot form in her stomach. She had known the risks of what she was doing, but hearing Danny confirm the scale of the danger made it all feel more real. She had spent years working as a private investigator, uncovering all kinds of secrets and lies, but this case was different. It wasn't just about exposing one corrupt person. It was about bringing down an entire system of power, a system that was willing to destroy lives to protect its interests. "I can't back down now, Danny," Tasha said, her voice firm. "I've seen too much. These people have ruined lives, destroyed families. They're not going to stop until they've taken everything. I can't let that happen." Danny nodded, his expression serious. "I get it, Tasha, but you have to be careful. You've already pissed off some pretty powerful people, and they're not going to take kindly to someone like you digging into their business. You're not just going after a few bad apples. You're going after the entire orchard." Tasha wasn't sure what to say to that. The truth was, she didn't know how much danger she was in. She had already been followed, her apartment broken into, and she had received countless threats. But this felt different. These people were connected, they had resources, and they weren't afraid to use them. But none of that was enough to make her stop. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for all the people who had been silenced, whose lives had been ruined by the greed and corruption of people like Mark Bradford and Judge Robert Hayes. "I need your help," she said, leaning in slightly. "I've got evidence, but I can't do this alone. You're the only one I trust to help me take this to the next level." Danny hesitated for a moment before nodding. "You've got it. We need to be smart about this. We can't just march in and throw all this evidence at them. We need to gather more, make sure we're airtight. If we make a mistake, they'll destroy us. We'll have to build a case so solid that even their connections can't save them." Tasha's heart raced, the sense of resolve flooding her veins. She knew this was the right decision. With Danny's help, she would be able to take her investigation further, gathering the final pieces of evidence to bring down the corrupt network she had uncovered. But there was no going back now. The deeper she went, the more dangerous it became, and the more she realized just how far this conspiracy stretched. As the two of them made plans to move forward, Tasha couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking in the shadows, waiting for her to make a mistake. She'd have been careful up until now, but the walls were closing in. There were people out there, powerful people, who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. Later that night, as she returned to her apartment, Tasha couldn't shake the uneasy feeling gnawing at her. Someone was watching her. She could feel it, like a presence just out of sight, always just behind her. And as she unlocked her door, she heard a faint sound, like a whisper, before everything went still. She wasn't sure who it was or what they wanted, but she knew one thing for sure. They weren't going to let her uncover the truth without a fight. The feeling of being watched didn't go away. It lingered in the back of Tasha's mind, gnawing at her as she went through the motions of her daily life. She double-checked the locks on her apartment door every night, kept the blinds drawn, and avoided any routine that could make her an easy target. But no matter how careful she was, she knew she wasn't safe. The threat was real, and the people she was up against were dangerous. Yet there was no way she could stop now, not when she was so close to bringing everything to light. The evidence she and Danny had gathered was enough to paint a damning picture of the corruption running through the city. They had discovered more shady deals, more illegal land grabs, and even more ties between Judge Robert Hayes and the developers who had been tearing apart neighborhoods. But there was still one piece of the puzzle missing: the direct link between Hayes and the city's top political figures. Without that, they couldn't move forward. Tasha spent the next few days poring over documents, tracing connections, and meeting with informants. The deeper she dug, the more horrifying the truth became. She had already known about the bribery and the illegal land transactions, but now she was uncovering a pattern of voter manipulation, political donations, and even the illegal use of police force to intimidate residents who had dared to speak out. It was a well-oiled machine, and Tasha was only starting to understand just how vast and powerful it really was. One night, as Tasha sat in her office, going through an old set of records she'd just received from an anonymous source, she found it. There, buried in a stack of public records, was a set of campaign finance documents that connected Judge Hayes directly to a group of influential city officials. There were transfers of large sums of money, hush money for whistleblowers, and even a shady offshore account with Hayes' name attached. The connections were undeniable, and Tasha felt a rush of adrenaline. This was the breakthrough she had been waiting for. But there was no time to celebrate. She had to act quickly. If she waited too long, the people involved would have time to cover their tracks, erase their digital footprints, and shut her down. Tasha immediately contacted Danny, urging him to meet her at a secure location. They needed to get this evidence into the right hands before it disappeared. The next day, Tasha and Danny met in a small, nondescript diner on the edge of town. It was a place where no one would notice them, where they could talk without fear of being overheard. Tasha slid the folder across the table to Danny, her eyes scanning the diner as if waiting for someone to jump out of the shadows. She wasn't paranoid. She had learned the hard way that vigilance was survival. Danny took the folder, flipping through the documents as he processed the information. His brow furrowed as he saw the connections, the money laundering, the illicit campaign funds. "This is it, Tasha," he said, his voice quiet but urgent. "This is the smoking gun. If we go public with this, it's over for them. Hayes and the whole system will come crashing down." Tasha nodded, but a sense of unease washed over her. They were so close now, but they couldn't afford to make a mistake. One wrong move, one slip-up, and everything they had worked for would vanish. The people they were up against were powerful and ruthless. Tasha knew they wouldn't go down without a fight. As she left the diner, her phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number read, *, you think you've won. It's just the beginning. Watch your back. *, her heart raced as she slipped the phone back into her pocket. It was a threat, and it was clear the people behind this were sending a message. But Tasha wasn't backing down. She had come too far to turn back now. The battle was only heating up, and she was more determined than ever to see it through. She wasn't just going to expose Judge Hayes and the corrupt officials she had uncovered. She was going to bring the whole system to its knees. The fight for justice had only just begun. The threat sent a chill through Tasha, but she refused to let it break her resolve. She had come too far, and the people depending on her, those whose lives had been destroyed by the corrupt system, were counting on her to bring it all down. She couldn't afford fear now, no matter how close the danger felt. In the days following, Tasha worked tirelessly, backing up every file and document she had gathered in case she needed to go public. But she couldn't afford to make a move without being absolutely sure. She needed to get the information into the right hands before someone found a way to silence her. Danny had been her rock throughout this investigation. He was the only one she trusted to help her navigate this labyrinth of corruption and deceit. They met regularly to go over the evidence, building a case that would be impossible to ignore. But every time they tried to figure out their next step, they ran into roadblocks. The officials they needed to bring the case to were either involved or too afraid to take action. Tasha knew they couldn't rely on the system to fix itself. The only way to truly take down the network was to go public, but that also meant putting herself in even more danger. There were whispers of people being disappeared, of private investigators going missing after digging too deep. The risks were real, but Tasha had always known that justice came with a price. One evening, as she was leaving a meeting with Danny, she caught a glimpse of someone watching her from across the street. It was a figure in a dark jacket, standing under the dim glow of a streetlight. Tasha's instincts kicked in immediately, and she ducked into a nearby alley, heart pounding. She didn't know who it was, but she couldn't take any chances. She waited for a few tense moments, peering around the corner of the building. The figure didn't follow her, but she knew they were still out there. Someone was watching, someone who didn't want her to uncover the truth. The next day, Tasha received a call from an unexpected source, a reporter named Aaron Foster. He had been investigating the same corruption for years but had been stonewalled at every turn. His sources had dried up, and he had hit a dead end in his search for the truth. However, after hearing rumors of a private investigator digging into the same corrupt network, he had tracked her down. "We've got to work together, Tasha," Aaron said, his voice urgent. "The public needs to know what's going on. If we wait any longer, it will be too late. The story could bring down the whole city, but we need to make sure we've got the right evidence before we go public. Once we do, we have to be prepared for the fallout." Tasha listened carefully, weighing her options. She had never worked with a reporter before, but Aaron was well respected in the city for his fearless reporting on corrupt officials. He had connections and resources that could help bring the case to the attention of the public, and he had a reputation for not backing down. "I'll send you everything we have," Tasha said after a long pause. "But we need to make sure we're ready. These people won't hesitate to come after us if they think we're a threat." Aaron agreed, and they made plans to meet in person the following day. Tasha felt a new sense of urgency. She was no longer just working in the shadows. She was about to step into the light, to take her fight for justice to the next level. As the day drew closer to their meeting, Tasha couldn't shake the feeling that someone was getting closer to her. She couldn't tell if it was her paranoia or if she was truly being followed, but it didn't matter. She had made a promise to herself, to the people whose lives had been shattered by the corruption she was fighting against. She wouldn't stop until the truth was exposed, no matter the cost. That night, as Tasha returned to her apartment, she locked the door with a sense of finality. There was no turning back. Tomorrow, everything would change. The following morning, Tasha woke with a sense of urgency coursing through her. Today was the day she would meet Aaron Foster, and she knew that everything hinged on how this meeting went. If Aaron was as serious as he claimed to be, then they could go public with the evidence she had painstakingly gathered. But she also knew that if they weren't careful, everything they'd worked for could fall apart in an instant. She spent the morning double-checking everything. The documents were safe, locked away in a secure folder on her laptop, and backed up to an encrypted cloud account. She'd taken every precaution to ensure that the evidence would survive if anything happened to her. She didn't want to think about what might happen if the wrong people got their hands on it, but she knew the risks. Around noon, she received a text from Aaron, confirming the time and location for their meeting. A small, quiet cafe on the edge of town, far enough from the city's political power centers for them to avoid attention, but still close enough to get things done. Tasha took a deep breath as she grabbed her coat and left her apartment, trying to ignore the unease that had settled in her chest. The cafe was just as quiet as she had imagined. The soft hum of conversations and the clink of coffee cups filled the air, but the atmosphere was relaxed, almost intimate. Tasha scanned the room for Aaron, spotting him at a corner booth. He was a man in his early 30s, wearing a smart but unassuming jacket and glasses. He looked like the kind of journalist who spent his days following the story rather than trying to be the story. She approached him, and he stood to greet her, offering a firm handshake. "Tasha, it's good to finally meet you in person," Aaron said, his voice calm but intense. "I've been following your work for a while, and I have to say, you've done something most people would never have the guts to do. I can only imagine what you've been up against." Tasha nodded, sitting across from him. "The system doesn't make it easy, but the more I've uncovered, the more I realize how deep the corruption goes. I've got everything ready: documents, recordings, the financial connections. But we need to be strategic. Going public too soon could ruin everything." Aaron smiled slightly, a look of understanding in his eyes. "I agree. We need to be precise. We need to be smart. The media is powerful, but it's also risky. Once we put this story out there, there's no going back." Tasha felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had feared that Aaron might try to rush things, but instead, he seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation. He wasn't just in it for a headline. He understood the importance of getting the story right. "I've already got some key contacts lined up," Aaron continued, leaning in slightly. "We'll need to work with some lawyers, make sure we're protected legally. I've also been in touch with a few activists who are willing to back us up publicly. The more people we have on our side, the harder it will be for them to discredit us." Tasha's mind raced. This was the moment she had been working toward for months. The pieces were falling into place, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She glanced around the cafe, scanning the patrons, searching for any signs of surveillance. She had learned to trust her instincts over the years, and right now they were screaming at her. "You're sure it's safe to meet here?" Tasha asked quietly, her eyes flicking back to Aaron. Aaron looked puzzled at first, but then followed her gaze. "Yeah, I think so. It's a low-profile spot. No one should be following us." Just then, Tasha noticed something out of the corner of her eye. A car parked across the street with tinted windows. A figure sitting inside, watching the cafe. It was subtle, but she knew exactly what it meant. Someone was tracking them. Before Aaron could respond, Tasha stood up abruptly. "We need to go. Now." Aaron's confusion turned to alarm as Tasha grabbed the folder of evidence. "What's going on? What did you see?" Tasha's eyes stayed locked on the car outside. "Someone's watching us. I think they know we're onto them." Without waiting for another word, she pushed past Aaron and walked quickly to the door, her heart racing. She couldn't afford to waste any time. If they were being followed, every second counted. Tasha's heart pounded as she stepped out of the cafe, her senses heightened. The moment she had seen the figure in the car, every instinct screamed at her to leave. She didn't know who was tailing them, but she didn't want to stick around to find out. As she walked briskly down the street, Aaron trailing behind her, she tried to calm herself. Panic was the last thing she needed right now. "We need to get somewhere safe," Tasha said, her voice steady but urgent. "I don't know how long we have before they catch up." Aaron's face was tense, his eyes darting to the car she had pointed out. It was still there, idling, its tinted windows giving nothing away. But Tasha had learned to trust her gut, and it told her that the danger was real. She had to move fast. They rounded the corner, walking quickly without looking back. The streets were busy, but that didn't mean they were safe. The figure in the car could be anyone, someone from the network she was trying to take down or just someone looking to intimidate them. Either way, she couldn't risk being followed. "I have a friend who owns a place nearby," Aaron said, glancing over at Tasha. "It's a secure location. We can lay low there until we figure out our next step." Tasha didn't hesitate. She nodded sharply, her eyes still scanning the surroundings. "Lead the way." Aaron took the lead, guiding her down a series of narrow streets until they arrived at a nondescript building tucked away in an alley. It was an old office building, one that looked like it hadn't been used in years. But it was perfect for what they needed, a place to disappear for a while, out of the public eye. Inside, the space was sparse but functional. There were old file cabinets, a couple of desks, and a chair in the corner. It wasn't much, but it would do for now. Aaron quickly locked the door behind them, double-checking that no one had followed. Tasha let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Aaron moved to the small desk, pulling out a laptop. "I'll get the data encrypted and sent out to a secure server," he said, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "We need to make sure nothing happens to it, even if they find us." Tasha nodded and took a seat, keeping her gaze fixed on the door. She wasn't sure if they were safe here or if the danger was still lurking just around the corner. But she knew one thing: they had no time to waste. After a few tense minutes, Aaron finished his work. "Everything's encrypted and backed up," he said, turning the laptop toward her. "We're ready. The evidence is out there, and now we just need to make sure the public knows." Tasha glanced at the screen, seeing the files uploaded to a secure server, ready to be shared with the right people. "This is it," she said, her voice low. "We have everything we need to take them down." But even as she said the words, she felt a weight pressing down on her. Going public meant exposing everything: Judge Hayes, the corrupt officials, the developers. But it also meant stepping into the line of fire. There was no turning back now. The stakes were higher than they had ever been, and the risks were greater than she imagined. Suddenly, the sound of a phone vibrating broke the silence. Tasha's heart skipped a beat as she reached for her phone, her eyes narrowing when she saw the message. Asterisk. "You think you've won. You're playing a dangerous game. Leave the city now, or you'll regret it." Asterisk. It was another anonymous threat, but this one felt different. The message was clearer, more direct. Whoever was behind this knew exactly what she was doing. Tasha's hand tightened around the phone as she looked up at Aaron. "We're running out of time," she said, her voice grim. "They're not going to stop. We have to take action now, or we might not get another chance." Aaron nodded, his face set with determination. "Then let's make sure we're ready. We go public, we expose them all, and we make sure the truth comes out. No more hiding." Tasha stood up, her mind racing. She had come this far, and there was no backing down now. The fight for justice was about to go global. It was her chance to take down the corrupt power structure that had held the city in its grip for far too long. But it was also her chance to send a message to those who thought they could operate in the shadows, untouched and untouchable. With a deep breath, she turned to Aaron. "Let's do this." And together, they began the final stage of their plan, one that would either bring the truth to light or change their lives forever.